Keisha Williams held her 3-day-old baby in her arms as she slowly walked down the hallway of Howard University Hospital in Washington, D.C. Every step was pure agony. The C-section incision burned like a hot iron. Her abdomen throbbed with every movement, and the pain of walking forced her to clench her teeth to keep from screaming. Still, she forced a smile because after 6 years of failed attempts, expensive fertility treatments that nearly bankrupted them, and 2 devastating losses, her dream of becoming a mother had finally come true. That day, Terrence, her 34-year-old husband, didn't show up at the hospital. He sent a cold message saying he was taking care of important matters, and that his cousin Monica would pick her up. Keisha didn't even respond, just sighed as she looked at her baby's chocolate-colored face. She had grown accustomed to his absence since the 7th month of her pregnancy. First, it was networking opportunities that always came up on weekends, then urgent professional commitments, and then he simply stopped making excuses. She didn't want to cause any conflict. She just wanted to get home to the Anacostia neighborhood, rock her son, and put him in the oak crib they had bought at a black furniture store in Shaw. She thought of that little room decorated with African-American art where she once imagined they would raise a strong, close-knit family. The lift stopped in front of the apartment in the housing complex. Monica got out first, helping Keisha with the luggage. When she opened the door, Keisha was struck by an eerie silence and the scent of a perfume that was definitely not hers. She had expected to find Terrence with flowers and that proud smile that had won her over at Howard University 9 years ago, but the living room was empty. Just a few seconds later, the sound of high heels echoed through the wooden hallway. A young woman emerged from the bedroom, a white woman with wavy blonde hair, wearing a light pink dress that contrasted starkly with her alabaster skin. She moved with a confidence that chilled the blood, wearing a vanilla perfume so strong that it saturated the entire room. Right behind her came Terrence, walking with a posture Keisha had never seen before, his chest puffed out, as if he had won some trophy. The man who once spoke proudly of his ancestors, who had studied African studies at Howard, who wore dashikis to cultural events, now looked at his black wife and newborn son as if they were obstacles to his progress. Without showing any emotion, he declared, "Monica, I want you to meet Ashley. This is the woman I truly love, and you need to accept that now." The air in the apartment became so thick it was impossible to breathe. Monica, a black nurse who had been working double shifts to help with the baby's expenses, dropped the glass of water she was holding. The glass shattered on the floor, but no one moved to clean it up. Ashley took a confident step forward, her blue eyes scanning Keisha from head to toe with a mixture of pity and superiority. "Hi, honey," she said with a condescending southern accent. "I hope you understand that this isn't about you personally. It's about Terrence finally finding someone who can truly support his ambitions." The words cut deeper than any blade. It wasn't just marital betrayal, it was the complete denial of black beauty, black motherhood, the black family they had built. Holding her son tighter against her chest, Keisha felt something that went beyond personal pain. It was the echo of centuries of black women being discarded by black men who pursued validation through whiteness. Monica, furious, pointed her finger at Terrence. "What the hell is going on here? Your wife gave birth 3 days ago. She can barely walk." Terrence shrugged, his voice laden with a disdain that cut like a razor. "Monica, you know Keisha and I don't have any real chemistry. We've been married for 8 years and only now have we been able to have a baby. She's done her part. Now I want to move on with someone who really completes me." Ashley added, possessively touching Terrence's arm, "We don't want to cause any unnecessary drama. Terrence deserves to be with someone who can open doors for him, you know? Someone who won't hold him back." The implication was crystal clear. Keisha, as a black woman, was seen as an obstacle to Terrence's progress. Ashley, as a white woman, represented social advancement, mainstream acceptance, and entry into spaces that her own wife supposedly couldn't provide. Keisha just watched without speaking, her legs trembling slightly. Her face was pale beneath her dark skin, and her hands clenched the baby blanket tightly. A bead of sweat rolled down her forehead, but she didn't wipe it away. She stared at Terrence not with anger or pleading, but as if trying to recognize the man who once took pride in his African heritage, who hung pictures of Malcolm X on his wall, who promised to raise children who were proud of their black identity. If your heart is aching at this betrayal that goes far beyond the personal, because it represents the historical pain of black women being abandoned by Eurocentric beauty standards, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because Keisha's response will show a strength that comes from generations of warrior ancestors. Monica sat on the couch in shock, Her experience as a healthcare professional had not prepared her to witness such a calculated and cruel betrayal. As a black woman who had faced her own battles in the predominantly white hospital system, she recognized the layers of internalized oppression that were unfolding before her eyes. Keisha entered the room walking like someone who was physically and emotionally wounded. Each step was a reminder not only of the recent surgery, but of the psychological violence she had just experienced. She laid the baby down in the crib with extreme care, noticing how his delicate features carried the heritage of both parents, a child who represented the continuity of a lineage that her own father now rejected. Out of maternal instinct, she gently touched the baby's forehead to check that he was okay. Seeing that he was sleeping peacefully, she whispered a prayer her grandmother had taught her, asking her ancestors to protect her son. Then she let herself fall onto the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of generations of black women who had faced similar abandonment. With hands trembling from physical and emotional pain, she changed the surgical pad. Outside, Terrence was talking animatedly with Ashley about plans that clearly did not include fatherhood. Keisha hugged her son to her chest and whispered, "Mommy's here, my prince. No matter what happens, you will always know who you are and where you come from." In the living room, Ashley gestured enthusiastically as she described her plans to open a luxury spa in Georgetown, clearly financed by the money Terrence should have been investing in his family. "It's the kind of business that attracts the right clientele, you know," she said, her words laden with racial code that did not go unnoticed by Monica. Terrence agreed eagerly, his eyes shining with the possibility of frequenting social circles he believed were beyond his black wife's reach. His gaze occasionally drifted to the bedroom door, not with guilt, but with a coldness that revealed how deeply he had internalized white supremacy. Around 3 p.m., Ashley rose gracefully. She left a basket of expensive organic fruit on the table, the kind of performative gesture privileged people make to demonstrate magnanimity. "I have to go to my personal trainer," she announced, adjusting her dress with studied movements. As she passed Keisha's bedroom door, without even looking directly at her, she raised her voice with poisonous sweetness. "I hope you get some rest, sweetie. Change is hard, but sometimes it's necessary for everyone to grow." And so she left, leaving behind not only her sickly perfume, but a clear demonstration of how white privilege operates, with condescension disguised as kindness. Terrence followed shortly after, without saying goodbye to his son or offering any words of comfort to his wife who had just given birth. That night, Monica prepared the traditional dinner her mother used to make, a chicken stew with spices that connected them to their southern roots. Keisha could barely eat, just drinking water and nibbling on some cookies left over from the hospital. 5 days after giving birth, when Keisha still felt dizzy when standing for more than 15 minutes, Ashley returned to the apartment alone. This time she was wearing an immaculate white linen outfit, a color choice that seemed deliberately symbolic. She carried a discreet but obviously expensive Italian leather bag. She didn't ring the doorbell. Monica was in the backyard hanging diapers on the clothesline, enjoying the afternoon sun. Ashley walked in as if she owned the place, positioning herself in the kitchen with a disturbing familiarity. "Hi, Keisha," she said in a voice that mixed false friendliness with authority. "I came to have an honest talk with you, woman to woman." Keisha, still in her nightgown in the bedroom, held the baby who was fighting jaundice. His face was colorless, his lips dry, beads of sweat covering his forehead. The baby needed constant phototherapy and feeding every 2 hours, but her milk supply had decreased dramatically due to stress. Ashley showed no interest in the well-being of the baby or the mother. Instead, she took a thick envelope out of her purse, a white envelope that contrasted with her perfectly manicured nails. She placed it on the dresser and made her announcement with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. "Here's $5,000, she declared without preamble. "It's enough for you to start over somewhere else. Terrence and I want to settle this civilly, without unnecessary legal complications." Keisha stared at the envelope as if it were a poisonous snake. At that moment, the silence was broken by Monica, who had entered and heard the obscene proposal. The basket of clothes fell from her hands, scattering clean diapers across the floor. "You have the audacity," Monica exploded, her voice laden with decades of racial frustration, "to walk into this woman's house, 3 days after she gave birth, and offer her money as if she were some inconvenience that can be bought?" Ashley backed away slightly, her confidence wavering for a moment in the face of Monica's fury. But she quickly regained her composure, shrugging with the ease of someone who had always had her privileges protected. "Look, I understand that this is emotionally difficult," she replied with studied condescension. But there's no point in clinging to a situation that clearly isn't working. Terrence deserves to be with someone who can truly support his professional ambitions. The implication was crystal clear. Keisha, as a black woman, was seen as an obstacle to Terrence's progress. Ashley, with her white privilege, represented access to social networks, professional opportunities, and social validation that her wife supposedly couldn't provide. Monica added, her voice trembling with indignation, "What about the baby? He was just born." Ashley responded with shocking indifference, "The child can stay with her, obviously. Terrence and I are still deciding on future visitation issues." She spoke about Terrence's son as if he were an administrative detail, a minor complication in her plans for a perfect life. At that moment, the baby cried, a sound that echoed through the apartment like an ancestral lament. Keisha lifted him into her arms, each movement a physical agony, but her determination growing with every second. She looked Ashley directly in the eyes for the first time and said in a voice that carried the strength of generations of black women who refused to be broken, "Get your money and your proposal out of my house. Now." Ashley left the apartment, leaving the envelope on the dresser, a toxic reminder of his attempt to buy Keisha's dignity. But something had fundamentally changed in the woman holding his son. It wasn't just anger, it was a deep connection to the strength of women like Sojourner Truth, Ida B. Wells, and her own grandmother who had raised 7 children alone in rural Mississippi. That afternoon, Keisha asked Monica to take her and the baby to the hospital for phototherapy treatment. She couldn't stay in that apartment contaminated by humiliation any longer and needed to breathe. Monica accompanied her, watching as Keisha carried her son with a determination that transcended physical pain. At the hospital, Keisha sat outside the phototherapy room, watching her tiny baby under the intense blue lights, wearing those tiny glasses that protected his delicate eyes. During the 3 hours of treatment, something powerful crystallized in her mind. She took out her phone and opened the Notes app. She began to document everything with the precision of a lawyer: post-C-section pain medication, $67, sterile compresses, $23, special formula for jaundice, $45, medical transportation, $40. She saved the note with her son's date of birth and added a line that would change everything: Project, Rebuilding the Jackson Dynasty. Keisha had been a respected urban architect before her maternity leave. She specialized in affordable housing and community development, designing spaces that honored African aesthetics while meeting modern needs. Her projects had been published in trade magazines, always with a focus on how architecture can strengthen black communities. Her last project before her pregnancy was an Afrocentric housing complex that incorporated elements of traditional African design. It was rejected by the Urban Planning Committee, composed mostly of white men, for being too culturally specific for the general market. That night, after putting her baby to sleep, Keisha opened her laptop for the first time in months. The rejected project was there, each line representing not only her architectural vision, but her deep understanding of how spaces can honor cultural identity. She began modifying the design, adapting it for single-family homes that celebrated African heritage, central courtyards inspired by traditional villages, use of natural materials, earthy colors that connected residents to their roots. She worked until dawn, feeding her baby every 2 hours, her determination growing with each stroke. At 8:30 in the morning, her phone rang. It was Zara, a colleague from Howard who had opened her own architecture firm focused on African American clients. "Keisha, I heard about your situation through Monica. I have a client who wants a house that celebrates our culture. Would you be interested?" Keisha looked at her sleeping son and replied, "Send me the details. I'm ready to work." Within 48 hours, she sent a complete proposal, a home that integrated architectural elements from the African diaspora with modern sustainability. The design included a central courtyard for family gatherings, colors inspired by Kent textiles, and gardens that honored traditional African plants adapted to the American climate. The client approved it immediately. The $3,200 payment was deposited into her account, the first money she had earned with her own talent since her son was born. But more important than the monetary value was what that project represented: her refusal to be defined by the limitations others tried to impose on her. That afternoon, she bought supplements to increase her milk supply and high-quality postpartum vitamins. When Monica asked about the money, Keisha replied proudly, "I designed a house that honors our ancestry. A client who understands the value of what we create." Monica smiled. It was the first genuine smile she had seen on Keisha's face in weeks. Your grandmother would be proud. That night, Keisha created a new folder on her computer, Keisha Williams, Architect Projects. For the first time in years, she didn't identify herself as someone's wife, but as a professional in her own right. As she breastfed her son, she whispered, "Mommy is going to build an empire for you, my prince. You will grow up knowing that we are descendants of kings and queens, no matter what anyone says." Across town, Terrence showed Ashley photos of the luxury apartment they planned to rent in Arlington. But his eyes occasionally drifted to his phone, where no messages from Keisha appeared. For the first time since he had made his decision, a twinge of doubt crossed his mind. If you feel that ancestral energy of strength and determination running through your veins, if you recognize the power of a black woman who refuses to be broken, share this video with a sister who needs to remember her own strength. Like if you believe that our culture is our greatest wealth, because what comes next will show how Keisha turned pain into economic power. 3 weeks later, as Keisha was finalizing details for her second project, a series of townhouses incorporating African geometric motifs, she heard the familiar sound of Terrence's modified Mustang. He walked in without knocking, carrying a dollar store bag with cheap formula and the wrong size diapers. He tossed the bag onto the kitchen table with contempt. "Here's what the kid needs. Don't text me anymore saying something's missing." His voice carried an irritation that revealed his discomfort with his own parental neglect. Keisha, sitting on the couch with her laptop open and the baby nursing peacefully, didn't look up from her project. Her calmness was devastating, the serenity of someone who had found her purpose and no longer needed validation from those who had rejected her. Terrence, disturbed by her silence, exploded, "You think you're superior because you're making a few bucks with your Afrocentric drawings? Let's see how long that lasts when your clients realize you're living in a fantasy world." Monica, who was in the kitchen preparing dinner, wanted to intervene, but Keisha made a subtle gesture for her to remain silent. She continued working, only looking up briefly to glance at Terrence with an expression that mixed pity and indifference. "Look at you," Terrence continued, his voice taking on a desperate tone. "Trying to raise this boy on your own, filling his head with this black pride nonsense. He's going to need to learn how to live in the real world." It was then that Keisha finally spoke, her voice calm but laden with ancestral power. "The real world is where women like me build empires while men like you chase validation. The real world is where our son will grow up knowing that his mother never bowed down to anyone who didn't recognize her worth." Terrence visibly trembled at Keisha's transformation. The vulnerable, pleading woman he had expected to find had been replaced by a force of nature he didn't recognize, but secretly intimidated him. He took the bag back and left, muttering, "You've changed. You're not the woman I married." Keisha replied without looking up from her project, "You're right. I found myself." In the months that followed, Keisha's work gained national recognition. Her projects appeared in Architectural Digest magazine in a special issue on African diaspora architecture. The article highlighted how she integrated traditional cultural elements with modern sustainability, creating spaces that strengthened community identity. The magazine cover showed Keisha holding her son in her lap, both standing in front of one of her finished homes, a structure that celebrated the beauty of African architecture adapted to the contemporary American context. The caption read, "Keisha Williams, Rebuilding Communities Through Cultural Heritage." The phone wouldn't stop ringing. Clients from across the country wanted designs that honored their cultural roots. Keisha set prices that reflected not only her technical expertise, but the cultural and emotional value of her work. A client in Atlanta paid $15,000 for a design that incorporated elements of Ghanaian architecture. A family in Oakland invested $12,000 in a home that celebrated West African traditions. Each project strengthened not only her bank account but her belief that architecture can be a form of cultural resistance. Monica watched the transformation with admiration. "Your grandmother isn't the only proud ancestor. The whole lineage is celebrating." Keisha moved into a spacious loft in Shaw, a historically black neighborhood undergoing gentrification. Her new office had large windows that flooded the space with natural light, walls decorated with contemporary African art, and a play area where her son could explore while she worked. The apartment was a visual statement of her values: furniture made by black artisans, books on African history, plants that connected the space to ancestral gardening traditions. Every element told the story of a woman who had turned rejection into cultural rediscovery. During this time, Ashley tried to contact Keisha several times. Her messages, initially arrogant, gradually took on a more desperate tone. Terrence had lost 2 jobs for attitude problems, corporate code for erratic behavior, and lack of professional focus. His relationship with Ashley was deteriorating as financial pressures mounted. The fantasy of upward mobility through an interracial relationship was being confronted by the reality that white privilege cannot compensate for emotional immaturity and financial irresponsibility. One Saturday afternoon, while Keisha was working in her office with her son playing at her feet, she saw Terrence standing across the street watching the building. He was holding an expensive toy, clearly an attempt to buy access to the relationship with the son he had neglected. The child, now almost 2 years old, spoke clearly and walked with confidence. When he saw the man across the street, he asked, "Mommy, who's that man?" Keisha looked out the window, her eyes briefly meeting Terrence's. There was no anger in her gaze, just the calmness of someone who had found peace through personal realization. "Just someone who missed out on meeting the most amazing boy in the world," she replied, kissing her son's forehead. Terrence left the toy on the steps of the building and walked away, his shoulders slumped under the weight of his own choices. 2 years after that devastating day at the hospital, Keisha Williams stood on the podium at the National Conference of African American Architects, holding the Innovation in Cultural Design Award. Her son, now 2.5 years old, sat in the front row next to Monica, applauding enthusiastically even though he didn't fully understand the magnitude of the moment. "This award is not just mine," Keisha said into the microphone, her clear, powerful voice echoing through the packed auditorium. "It belongs to every black woman who has ever been told that her dreams were too small, her culture wasn't commercial enough, or her strength wasn't valuable enough." The audience rose to a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. Amid the applause, Keisha saw faces that mirrored her own journey, black women who had turned rejection into revolution, who had converted pain into purpose. Her speech continued, "The architecture we create isn't just about physical structures. It's about rebuilding our collective self-esteem, creating spaces where our children grow up knowing that our aesthetic is beautiful, our history is valuable, and our presence is powerful." That night, in her hotel suite, Keisha video-called clients from coast to coast. Her firm now employed 6 architects, all committed to projects that celebrated African heritage. Her waiting list was over a year long. The phone rang. It was an unknown number, but when she answered, she immediately recognized Ashley's voice. "Keisha? I wanted to congratulate you on your success. I saw the article in the magazine." Ashley's voice was different, smaller, devoid of the arrogant confidence that had once characterized her. "I also wanted to apologize. For what I did, for what I said. I didn't understand." Keisha listened silently, allowing Ashley to finish. "Terrence and I broke up 6 months ago. He couldn't adjust after he lost his job. He became bitter, blaming everyone else. I realized that maybe I destroyed something beautiful for the wrong reasons." "Ashley," Keisha replied with a kindness that surprised them both, "I thank you for setting me free. You forced me to discover who I really am when no one else is defining my worth." After hanging up, Keisha sat on the hotel balcony looking at the city lights. Her son slept peacefully in his bed, surrounded by African storybooks and toys that celebrated his cultural heritage. Monica had moved into her own apartment, partially financed by Keisha as a way of thanking her for her support during the most difficult times. "Family is who you have when things get tough," Monica always said. A month later, during an African craft fair in D.C., Keisha saw Terrence watching from afar as she and her son explored the stalls. The child, now talkative and curious, asked about every mask, every fabric, every musical instrument. Terrence approached hesitantly, carrying a clearly expensive gem drum. "Keisha? I brought this for him. I thought he might like music." The child looked at the stranger with polite curiosity but no recognition. "Mommy, who is that man?" Keisha knelt down beside her son, her hands gently touching his small shoulders. "This is Terrence," she said in a neutral voice, without anger or bitterness. "He helped bring you into the world, but Mommy is the one who built the home you grew up in." The child examined Terrence with the brutal honesty of small children. "Why weren't you at our house?" Terrence swallowed hard, his hands shaking slightly as he held the drum. I made a really big mistake, little one. Daddy wasn't smart enough to stay." "It's okay," the child replied with the ease of someone who had never known absence as loss. "Mommy says our family is perfect just the way it is." Terrence looked at Keisha, and for the first time she saw something that had been missing during all their years of marriage: genuine humility. Can I at least give him the drum?" Keisha nodded. The child took the instrument and immediately began to beat out a natural rhythm, his face lighting up with joy. "Mommy, look. He makes music like the grandfathers in Africa." "Just like the grandfathers," Keisha confirmed, smiling to see her son connected to his roots through music. Terrence watched for a few minutes, trying to memorize every expression on his son's face. "Keisha, I know I have no right to ask anything, but will he know about me? About our family?" "He'll know the truth," Keisha replied. "That he's descended from kings and queens, that his mother fought to give him a life where he'll never have to diminish himself to be accepted, and that some adults make mistakes that cost more than they can ever pay." Terrence nodded, understanding that this was all the opening he would get. "Thank you," he whispered, "for raising a boy who will grow up knowing his worth." He walked away slowly, pausing once to look back. The image he saw would be etched in his mind forever: Keisha and her son sitting on an African mat, him playing the drum while she pointed to traditional masks, explaining stories of warrior ancestors. That night, back in her loft, Keisha opened a letter that had arrived that morning. It was from the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, inviting her to design a new wing dedicated to African diaspora architecture. She looked at her son, who was sleeping with his new drum in his arms, and whispered, "Grandma was right when she said that every tear that doesn't break us makes us diamonds." 3 years later, Keisha was on the cover of Forbes magazine in the issue on Black women rebuilding America. The article highlighted how she had turned a moment of personal devastation into a life mission that impacted entire communities. Her company, Ancestral Spaces Architecture, employed 25 professionals and had projects in 15 states. Each structure they created told a story of resilience, beauty, and cultural pride. Keisha's son, now 5, attended a school that celebrated cultural diversity. When asked about his family in a school project, he drew a house with large windows, gardens full of African plants, and 2 figures: a strong woman he identified as Mom, the dream builder, and himself, whom he described as Prince of our dynasty. When the teacher asked about his father, he replied with the wisdom of someone raised with self-esteem: "Some families have 2 main people, others have 1 person who is strong enough for 2. We are the second type." Keisha's story became legendary in Black entrepreneurial circles, not just for her financial success, but for how she proved that our culture is not something to be overcome, but celebrated and monetized. She turned pain into power, rejection into rediscovery, and abandonment into self-determination. As Keisha always said in her speeches, "They thought they were taking me out of their lives. In fact, they set me free to build a kingdom where people like us are always royalty." If this story of transformation and Black power touched your soul, if you recognize the ancestral strength that runs through your veins, share this video with someone who needs to remember that our heritage is our greatest wealth. Like if you believe that Black women are miracle makers, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove we don't just survive, we thrive, dominate, and rebuild the world in our image and likeness.